Welcome back to Light O'Clock and to the third and last episode of our mini-series on how we interact with daylight. In our first two episodes, I chatted with my colleagues Anna and Priji to explore how factors like geographical location, climate, cultures, traditions, and individual behaviors shape our relationship with daylight. We heard snippets from our participants Reshaya, Helga, Sophie, and Andrea, reflecting on their experiences living and working in Malaysia, Singapore, Norway, New York State, and Costa Rica. Anna and Priji, I'm happy to be back in the studio with you.
Hello. Hi, Caro. Thank you for having us again and happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having us, Caro.
So today's topic is the built environment and how it shapes our interactions with daylight. So this is the last bubble of the framework that we introduced in the first episode. And let's just pause here before we get any further. Priji, as an architect, can you give us a simple explanation of what we mean by built environment?
Yes, of course, Caro, and I'm glad you asked. So, built environment, it refers to human-made surroundings and infrastructures that shape the physical spaces in which we live, work, and interact. So, think about our buildings, streets, and everything in between these. So the homes, offices, schools, parks, gardens, museums, airports, railway stations, in short, every other physical space that reflects this human design and planning, that all comes under built environment.
All right. So this is the last bubble that you identified in your framework. And so this is, the last bubble that we cover in this mini-series and in these episodes. As we already discussed before, geolocation, cultures, and behaviors. So how does the built environment relate to these other bubbles?
Yeah, maybe let me just get back a bit in time. So in the first place, before we even came up with the bubble framework, I think we were curious about the interplay between behaviors and the built environment because, Priji is an architect, I'm a psychologist by training. So this was sort of, where we started. And when I first started to think about light exposure more as a behavior, an active behavior, you really realize that there are boundaries to how much you can control yourself. Think, for example, of your job environment. Here you have you're very limited in what you can do about your light exposure. For example, you might sit in your office with, probably mixed lighting conditions, or you might work underground without any daylight. Or maybe you work outside, let's say on a construction site, building houses where you have a lot of daylight. And so often you can't really choose how much daylight you get because this is limited, right? So with this, of course, the way your environment is shaped will hence have an effect on the light you're exposed to and whether you have to or you can control it or not.
And Anna, if you remember what Reshaya mentioned in episode 1, her mother-in-law loves doing her laundry. And the house has an outdoor space on the north and the south sides where she alternates drying clothes in the sun. And sun or air drying laundry is such a deeply rooted practice across the tropics and equatorial regions. And in fact, we rave about the crispness of the sun-dried clothes, and it's almost a gold standard. I hear it from my parents as well who live in the tropics. And it's often preferred over electric dryers. And indoors, it's usually too humid to dry anyways. Now, if you think about this cultural practice of drying laundry outside in Asian cultures or in tropical cultures, this is such a big contrast to Europe. Where we dry clothes mostly indoors or we use electric dryers. And in Europe, or at least in Berlin, there are in fact rules to drying laundry outside. That's what, at least I know here in Berlin, you can't have clothes seen from the street or seen at the eye level because it's considered just unaesthetical. But you really see this cultural practice of drying laundry also reflected in the building design. As Reshaya described, in Malaysia, homes often have an outdoor drying areas. In India, we have like open terraces or balconies, and these are spaces where it's dedicated to drying clothes. And even in more modern built environments like Singapore, where it's a high rise, it sits in the equator, Singapore, And even then, when we used to live on the 14th floor, we had a very, very small, what was called a utility space that was very specifically for drying clothes. Now, the space did not have any glass windows. It wasn't sealed. So it was very much open to the natural elements. Now, all this to say how such a cultural practice ties also into the building design and how they influence each other. And this very fact influences our behavior as well. You dry clothes in Asian countries, it brings you closer to daylight. Here, not so much.
Right. So we kind of have this pattern again that all of these bubbles that you identified are kind of interconnected and really influence each other as well. And so coming back to the build environment, what kind of questions were you asking the participants of the snippets this time to understand how they related to the built environment?
We wanted to understand how built spaces influenced our behaviors in the way we interact with daylight. Are we seeking it? Are we staying away from it? Are we enjoying it within these spaces? And our questions were always focused on 3 physical spaces where we spend most of our indoor times, our homes, our workplaces, and growing up, the schools or kindergartens, right? And so we asked interviewees, for example, what their favorite space at home or work was, or whether the spaces had windows. We prodded them a bit more to describe the windows to us, or where the daylight entered the space, whether the daylight was coming from the side or from the top, and what the view they saw through the windows were. So we also asked if they remembered their classrooms. And one of my absolute favorite questions, and that often brought a smile out in a participant or an interviewee or a flashback, was, where did they play as a kid? Yeah. And Caro, I want to ask you this question. Where did you play as a kid?
I remember I played a lot in my friends' gardens. Like at the gate of the school, we would decide which house we're going to, and then we would just play until it was dinner time. I had 2 best friends, and so it was their garden or my garden. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was an outdoor space.
Yeah.
And you probably remember this garden very well.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And see, it brings a smile on your face.
Yes.
So that's what we saw. Anyways, I digress.
Nice memories, yeah. And in fact, you just said it as well, but you will realize also from the snippets that we will hear now that the environment, especially, I guess, traditional housing, is of course shaped by the geolocation due to local weather or climate conditions, and often also what culture then makes of it. So culture adapts to these conditions. But let's start by hearing what our participants have to say about their favorite place at home. And I think it's very interesting because we will hear that they all mention a specific spot that receives a special light exposure.
Do you have a favorite space in your house?
I do. So I'm a bit of a plant mom. I have this beautiful balcony and I have all my plants and I have my coffee table. And so I just sit, and it's really funny because I have my indoor plants and my indoor plants are facing the forest. So I wonder if sometimes they feel like they want to be out there. But yeah, so I just sit in that space with my plants and I just let the sun in and I have my chats with my husband or with my child in that space.
So I live in a house, it's not like, it's a bit out of the center, not really that far, but Oslo is not that big a city. So I have a house with a garden there. So it's a nice place because it's not so far to go to the forest. I can walk to the forest in 15 minutes and then I can also bike to the city center in 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. My terrace is wooden, directed towards south. So I have the southern sun. And it has a shielding for the wind, so I can sit really protected. So already in April, it can be really warm and I can enjoy the sun there. So yeah, that's why I like a lot having this terrace in to be protected from the cold and gathering the solar power.
I think it's my couch, which is actually a day bed. It's a full twin mattress. I just have pillows on it to make it a couch. So it's very comfy and it's against the windows, which face, I have to think about the direction they face. I think they face west. Yeah, because later in the day, because I can see the sunset kind of behind the houses. But in the late afternoon, the sun like comes directly like onto the couch. And so it's really nice for like reading in the afternoon or like taking a nap.
And what do you see outside the window?
The street, it's, you know, sort of a, yeah.
The view?
Yeah, it's, you know, a sort of small neighborhood street. There's some of the houses are split into apartments. Some of them are still just one family. And so I can see a few houses, one of them across the street. There's some little kids who live there. So sometimes they're outside, like on the sidewalk with their little scooters and stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple big trees and I can see the sun sort of go down behind the houses. Yeah, I can see to the sky.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's also some big like bushes right outside the window. So depending on the angle of the sun, I sometimes also get nice like shadows of like the bush sort of branches dancing in the wind.
And what's your favorite space in your house?
Well, I live in a building that it's about 7 floors. Yes. My favorite part of my house is it's a balcony because I live in the like in the first floor, but there are 2 parking levels.
Levels is still above ground?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, they are not underground. So they are open as well. So you can feel the air and everything. So there are 2 parking levels and then I'm on the first level and I have a north, because the building is like an L. So this side is the north and this side is the east. So I picked the north facade and in that balcony, it's all open and it's open to a huge reserve. So a lot of like trees and there's also a river. And since this place belongs to the entire project, it cannot be touched. So you cannot build there. So it's always there and you hear the water, you see all the mountains, you see the sky, you see the trees, and it's really, really nice.
So what I found interesting here and made me smile a lot was how all these favorite spots mentioned by the participants had something to do with light. For example, balconies were mentioned a lot, or a couch where the light hits in a particular way in case of Sophie. And the view outside was also mentioned. Now, of course, all of the participants here work in the field of light, so it kind of makes sense that their favorite spots at home are somewhat related to light. But I do think that balconies are a very special spot. And if I think about my favorite spot at home, I think without doubt, I would also go for a balcony.
So not the garden anymore, Caro.
No, because I don't have one now.
I see. Well, that makes a difference. Yeah. So what stuck to me was the idea of a half indoor, half outdoor space. Or actually, how did you call it, Priji?
Yes, Anna, you mean the transitional or in-between spaces.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice term. So a balcony, for example, is a way of still being protected, right, from the weather, but you can still experience the outdoors. Even more so than through a window, right? Because you really feel the wind, you feel the elements and so on. But of course, the window gives a similar opportunity, but it's just more, or I would say less exposed than when you're in a balcony. So one can interact with the outside world from inside. This is a concept I, of course, experienced before, but I didn't really actively think of it before I met Priji.
Absolutely a key observation, Anna, because as I said, these so-called transitional or in-between spaces, they give you the experience of outdoors while being connected to an indoor space. And that's the key definition over here. They can be fully exposed, they can be partially exposed or fully protected from the sun, rain, wind, snow. Other examples other than a balcony is a patio, a porch, a courtyard. They all come under this spatial definition. Even lobbies, for example, completely covered lobbies are also transitional spaces. Now, coming back to the balcony, from my very daylight-loving perspective, a balcony where you can actually step out from your indoor environment feels like a well-being luxury. It's kind of like a little outdoor escape at home, and Caro, you just mentioned we don't have the luxuries to have a garden if we don't live in a landed property, so balconies give us this opportunity. And something that stood out to me in all the 4 descriptions of favorite spaces was how aware the interviewees were of their location. And, Helga describes the pleasantness of a south-facing balcony in Oslo. Sophie describes their couch having this golden light next to a west-facing window, and Andrea enjoying the north balcony in Costa Rica. This also really reflects how built environment is influenced by which part of the world it is built in and the geolocation, but also how the behavior is influenced by both the location as well as the physical space. So think of a balcony in the north in Costa Rica is used more frequently than a balcony in the east in Costa Rica, as Andrea mentions. And another example is Helga would probably not have frequented her balcony so early in the year if it was north facing in Oslo, because it would have been very cold. And another highlight is also what Reshaya, Sophie, and Andrea see from their favorite spaces. The view we have can also be a factor that draws us closer to that window or makes us, oh, I want to step out to the balcony or linger just a bit longer or lesser in these spaces where we can interact with daylight.
Yeah, I think that's true, Priji, that they were very aware of the directions, these participants. But I think many other people don't really know the directions. Like, for example, if you'd ask a random person on the street, point me to where east or west is, I think these days most people don't really know anymore. And I guess we have a very special subsample here because of the summer school. But of course, in former times, this was very important to know, and people would need to tell the time, for example, from the sun, or of course, orientate themselves with the help of the sun. But yeah, to circle back to the architecture, I think another aspect we were interested in understanding is also how the architecture of the buildings, like let's say the windows, the facades, and the indoor design influences how we experience daylight indoors. Priji, could you briefly explain again how different windows might affect how much light comes in for non-architects to appreciate this concept?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Anna. Many people, of course, don't consciously track the orientation of their spaces in relation to the sun anymore. They don't even need to, but they feel it. And I'm sure you feel it when you walk on a south-facing street and have the sun on you. You feel that delight here in the northern latitudes. So this feeling of comfort, delight, and sometimes even the harshness of the sun in the tropics, for example, people feel it, and that's the inextricable link of physical spaces to their location and how that influences behavior. And yes, coming back to windows, I'm going to be a bit poetic about them. When you puncture a wall to make a window, it's actually the weakest point of the physical space in terms of exposure to the outside. Whether that's heat, light, wind, sound, or safety. You break a wall, you puncture a wall, you have created the weakest point by putting a glass in there. And it's also one of the most expensive elements. Walls are cheaper to build, glass is more expensive, frames are more expensive, so it's also more expensive to build. But it's our one and sometimes the only connection to the outside in an increasingly indoor lifestyle. If you work from home 9 to 6, and you have a window in the space, that's your only connection to the outside. Now, large windows, they bring in more light. Taller windows carry that light deeper into the spaces. And in the northern latitudes, a south-facing window brings more light than a north-facing window. Windows are usually on vertical walls. We call these side-lit spaces, but they can also be on the roofs or ceilings as skylights. They create a top-lit space. So both these side-lit and top-lit spaces, they have very, very different qualities of light, also the brightness that they create in the space and how they render a room. Windows, they can also be clear, they can be tinted to reduce heat from solar radiation, they can be fritted or translucent to soften the light and provide privacy. You can add shutters outside, curtains inside, blinds of different kinds, shades, and many, many kinds of control systems to modulate the heat, the light, wind, and safety. We could make a whole podcast on windows.
Wow, you're going wild, Priji. But honestly, I think we should. I think it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, and I have more. Windows can also be fixed. They can be fixed, they can be non-openable, and they can become an entire facade. And it's a design playground for us, windows, for architects, or especially us who probably love daylight. So they can become entire facades, or they can become sliding doors. And we hear more about this in our next snippet, where Reshaya describes windows in her spaces.
I stay in an apartment, but it's not a high-rise apartment. It's a really vintage apartment. It's 2 floors. So there's a ground floor, a first floor, and a second floor. But it is, it's single story and it's pretty big. Yeah. I think they're pretty standard windows.
As in like rectangle?
Oh, yeah, they're rectangular windows. I mean, but there are some creative houses that have other shaped windows. But I'm just realizing now that in my apartment where I stay, so I'm describing my childhood home, but in the current place that I stay, I actually don't have any windows. I only have sliding glass doors. I don't have a single window in my house. Everything is a sliding glass door to an outdoor space. And even like where I work, my home office, it's not a window. It's a glass door that connects to the balcony. My house has no windows.
Not even the bathroom?
No, because the bathroom is facing the walkway of the apartment.
Okay.
And
so that doesn't have any opening then?
No, it has ventilation, but it doesn't open up to outside. Yeah. Oh, that's illuminating. My cubicle faces a glass screen, so I do get sunlight from there at the cubicle.
So the cubicle is your work environment,
yes,
or office basically.
Yes.
And then when you look outside the window, what do you see?
I see the outside. I see some trees. I see buildings. I see the campus. Yeah, the landscape of the campus. Yeah.
And what does it look like? It's apart from trees. Is it? Yeah.
Singapore is very metro. So it's a city view. You see roads, cars, lights, more buildings, tall buildings. And a lot of greenery too. I think Singapore has a good mix of the city and also it seems like they've worked around nature. Yeah, and that's how the landscape looks like. But of course, from time to time, the visibility is not as clear because there's today we Googled and we found out that Singapore has 100% light pollution and we also have air pollution. So that's something that changes from time to time.
What about the colors of your windows? Is it usually tinted in Singapore?
Actually, I'm not sure if it's tinted. It doesn't seem like it's tinted.
My experience is that it's a bit green in Singapore. All the tints are a bit greenish.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And how high or which floor do you live?
We're on the 16th floor.
16th floor. And do you see the building opposite or you have a bit of the sky for your view?
A lot of the sky.
A lot of the sky.
Yeah. So I think like from where I'm sitting, there's no big buildings right in front. It's pretty much like what we're looking at. Just we don't have the beautiful mountains and the beautiful houses. Yeah. But these roads. Yeah.
Do you have like a blind or a shade for the window?
We don't. So that's really funny. So there's no I think here you can just pull the shutters down or there's a button and the shutters come down. So there's no shutters or blinds. So the person who sits opposite me, unfortunately for him, his position is directly, he receives the glare.
So he would be looking out of the window?
No, so he, how does it work?
It's like here.
He faces this side, but the glare comes and it still affects him while working. So the only way to block the glare was with a big whiteboard.
So you have a side lit window, basically. The window is on the side.
So if I was
for me, it is front facing, but for him, it's my cubicle is like facing the window, but he sits sideways. Yeah, but I also have like a blocker at the side, but I still get a good view of what's happening outside the window.
And there are no frits on the window as well.
What are frits?
Frits are like these, you have some sort of patterns on the windows that help you either reduce heat or reduce the amount of light. So some sort of a pattern.
No.
So it's a
so this is like in the cubicle, but sometimes when I work with my team, we book meeting rooms. And these meeting rooms are 2 walls, a door, and then a complete glass window looking outside, but those rooms come with shutters and blinds. Yeah. But they don't have the buttons that change the opacity or the tint. Yeah.
Do you find some difference from where you come from as in your home to when you then transition to Singapore?
Yeah, I do. My home is very sunny. but it's also very funny. So each room in my house opens up to the outside, and I've got a beautiful view of the forest. So in the morning, I wake up and I open all the curtains and let the sunlight in, and it's just beautiful. And it's just a bit sad when I go to work because I don't have for me, getting fresh air or like direct contact with the outside is important. And I do feel like I go kind of into an aquarium.
I really liked here the aquarium metaphor that Rashaya brought up. I guess many people who live in the countryside in very green areas and then have to commute and have to go to work in a big city, maybe by public transport or car, feel in a similar way. And in this case, aquarium is really fitting because Rashaya describes her office as having really many glass doors where she can look to the outside. And to come back one more time to windows, Priji, as an architect and also as someone who has lived in Singapore, would you say that having these large windows and glass doors is typical in these areas around the equator?
You know, Caro, my hunch of why Rashaya might experience this space as an aquarium may not just be these huge glass windows that she describes, but it's also because she cannot open them and she does not have blinds to control them. And so this could also be why she describes this as an aquarium, but it's a very good metaphor. And also, that's a very interesting question you ask, Caro. These glass facade buildings, they aren't really tied to any one place, not the equator, nor a specific climate. They are a universal type of architecture that you see in newer built, almost wealthier cities like Singapore, Dubai. They are an example of how architecture does not really have to respond to location or climate because we have mechanical systems and we can create entirely unique indoor climates with these mechanical systems. So I have lived in both Singapore and Dubai and ironically had glass doors with colored tints and an access to a balcony in both these places. And these sliding glass doors, they are great because you get an almost floor to ceiling window, which means more light and of course more heat, and an access to step out to a balcony. And these places are also generally more safe in terms of break-ins. So that's a luxury to have a sliding door that you cannot lock or that cannot be protected maybe if somebody breaks in. And for example, at my parents' home in India, we have a frittered glass window with an additional layer of metal grills for privacy and safety. So this is a very different experience of using a window and in turn, the daylight exposure you get.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, Priji, it's also one of the most expensive parts of the house, which I painfully experience right now building my own house. And, I went into this endeavor thinking I'm going to have windows all over the place. But of course, it's very expensive, unfortunately, yeah. So
and skylights more than your vertical windows.
Exactly. And of course, I want to have a lot of skylights. So difficult.
Nice.
But anyways, another thing that came up in our conversations was how people control light, specifically controlling indoor light exposure while working or being at home.
How do you control light in your home? So that was one thing you just mentioned, like closing the curtains.
Closing the curtains.
Is there anything else? How you?
Just closing the door because I do leave a little light on in the front of my house. Like just as you enter, there's a light. So if you don't close the door, you still get a little bit of that light coming in. My nights used to be darker, but now with the toddler, sometimes I have this night light. Mm-hmm. But I only put it on for about 30 minutes and then after that I turn it off. So that night light is it's like a projection of the stars on the ceiling. Yeah, so I have that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I turn it off.
And do you use any dawn simulation lights or any that kind of thing?
No.
Waking up or?
No, I don't need to. Yeah, because like when I open the windows, it's like dawn is here. Oh, you mean like to naturally wake up?
Yeah, because you're asleep and so because your curtains are closed.
Yeah. And no, this is an alarm clock. And also the natural body clock just knows what time to wake up to, yeah. But here, I think... yeah, I've left my windows and all open and it's really nice to wake up because you can feel like the room is bright. Mm-hmm. So that's a different experience actually.
But at home I also have kind of these curtains that I close them in the night when it's dark outside and light inside, because then people would see directly inside. Mm-hmm. And also in the bedroom, I have curtains to close out the light from the street outside.
I have blinds in the windows, which don't completely cut out the light. But those windows are off the side of the house onto like a little alley. So it's not super bright, but some light definitely does come in. But I feel like it's worth it to have a little bit of light at night in order to then have definitely the sun come in the morning. So that's a balance. And then I drive to the campus, which is like a 20-minute drive about. And if I drive on the highway, I can really sort of see the sky, and that's nice when it's sunny. But when it's not sunny, I like to drive more on the like smaller roads, because then there's like more interesting like houses and shops and trees and stuff that can act as the scenery. And then on campus, in our lab, all of the lab spaces, the windows are blacked out because we need darkness for our experiments.
Oh.
So when I have to work in the lab, that's not ideal because I'm not getting any daylight. So I have to like remember to go out and go on a walk around campus just to get some sunlight. But otherwise we have like a grad student office with a bunch of desks in it. And there are some very narrow windows along one wall. So if you have a window desk, you get some more light, but we did measure the light at different spots in the office, and even the ones right next to the window like didn't quite get the 250 melanopic EDI. So there's not enough daylight in that room. We know this, but yeah, especially when it's better weather, we try to sort of remind each other about like, oh, like I'm going on a walk, come on a walk with me, to just have a little 10-minute in the sun. Because yeah, even our main like classroom space, the windows unfortunately are on the same side of the room as the projector screen. So those also have blinds that are basically permanently shut. So yeah, the daylight access is kind of bad.
I found it very funny that Sophie and their colleagues measured if they actually met the 250 lux in their office. So I think we have mentioned this on the podcast before, but basically this 250 lux describes the intensity of light that we are recommended to meet during daytime. So we should be exposed to at least 250 lux or more throughout the day. But as Sophie already said, this really rarely happens. And there are also studies testing this and showing that in different locations like home office, but also offices at the workplace, 250 lux is very ambitious as a goal.
Yeah, I think it really shows that very often we cannot control light the way we would like to. And specifically at the work, as I mentioned earlier. Think about all the specific jobs that don't have access to daylight, like people working underground or in operation rooms and so on. But of course, many of these places could still be optimized because often the daylight exposure is not even taken into consideration when designing a building. And on another very personal note, another contradictory aspect is if you're a curtain user or not. So that's not just an individual behavior, but again, shaped by culture. As I heard, I think in the Netherlands, people hardly use curtains, whereas in Germany, we love curtains, right? We love them for privacy reasons, but I mean, Germans are crazy about them. And even worse, these very ugly, in my opinion, very ugly blinds. Sorry, I hate these blinds. Yeah, we use them a lot. So Sophie described why these can be useful, for example, to sleep in darkness. And remember, this is what we want, right? Dark nights and bright days. They, of course, also block out the sun in the morning when you actually want to have it to help you wake up, at least in specific parts of the world. Which, of course, is the idea of having also the dawn simulation alarms, right? And as a side note here, this is another example of where technology actually replaces something you can have for free because the sun comes up every day. And on a second side note, smart technology could actually even help you with the curtain problem by opening them by a set time, for example.
That's funny about the curtains and blinds. I didn't realize that this was a German thing. But now that you mention it, it kind of makes sense. Because there's definitely a lot of them in Germany, yeah. And I noticed this also when I'm in Northern Europe, that this is lacking actually. So not so many people there use curtains. And I find myself looking inside the living rooms and, on these ground floor flats, you can see a lot inside. And I used to feel very intrusive about just, peeking in. But now I actually just take inspiration for interior design choices. And yeah, Priji, earlier you also mentioned that you asked participants about their school environment. I think we also teased this a little bit in the previous episode. What were you specifically interested in?
Yeah, Caro, for adults, most of our indoor time is spent at home or work. But for kids, it's schools. And so we were curious to know how much the school designs vary across locations in relation to daylight. Now, architecturally, schools, they fall into a very specific building category. So there are often guidelines shaping how they are designed. Just as an example, the other categories are, residential buildings, commercial buildings. So oftentimes there are building regulations that define how do you design a residential building, or how do you build a commercial building, or in this case, how do you build an educational building. Now, when designing these categories of buildings, you have to meet certain criteria. And in building and planning regulations, they can be guidelines, and there are many guidelines usually. And one among those guidelines or regulation, in fact, will be provide sufficient lighting. And sufficient lighting could mean anything. So the terminologies are usually just sufficient lighting or provide appropriate lighting. Now that can be just electrical lighting, or it can be a mix of both these lightings. And most often, daylight is not a word that is mentioned in these regulations. So in essence, to have daylight specifically mentioned in building regulations is actually not so common.
Yeah, I think this is so strange for me as a non-architect. I thought this was the first thing you would take into consideration, daylight, right? Yeah, so something I learned here again. And all of this was also reflected in the snippets that you're about to hear. And in some countries, these regulations still exist, or at least existed in the past, while in others, daylight is not considered, as I said. And let's start hearing from Rashaya and Andrea, who describe school architecture and daylight in schools around the tropics, where daylight, of course, often means high temperatures as well.
But do you remember going to school and what a typical school classroom or anything that you remember?
So school classroom setup. My primary school didn't have staircases. It was all like on one floor. I sat next to the window. And at that time, it was not the windows, and I'm not sure how to describe it, but they were the kind with the glass slabs, which you shut up and shut down.
You have louvers.
Louvers, yeah. See, I don't know.
I also don't know. So it doesn't open?
No.
Like it's up, down.
Yeah.
It's up, down.
So I think it's common in the UK as well, no?
You have some here, so they are wooden. In some cases, you have wooden shutters. You can have wooden slats.
I see.
But in your case, it was glass slats.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were really dangerous because sometimes the glass will just slip and fall and break. But yeah, so we sat near windows, and because if it wasn't raining, we didn't really turn on the electrical lights.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't rely on the electrical lights for school unless it was really cloudy, stuff like that. Yeah.
And do children have to spend the break somewhere specifically?
Yeah. So we do have cafeterias, and because it's really warm, so there is a shaded or like a space where it's entirely roofed, but you also have the freedom to be in the football field or in the little spaces that, like my school had a garden in the middle with they were shaped in mushrooms, like toadstools. They were toadstool little, like pergolas, like not pergolas, like little toadstool spaces. It was red with white spots, like literally a toadstool.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they have little benches underneath. So we would sit under that. Yeah, like little fairies under a toadstool. Yeah.
Is your toddler's classroom?
So this is where I am. Unfortunately,
She's rolling her eyes.
Yeah, I feel like the reason why I'm so disciplined with bringing him to the playground is because his play school is basically a house. And everything is indoors. Even the playground that he has is indoors. And I understand it's because it's of the space that they have. And they have like 1 hour of PE on Friday morning. And I think that's the only time he comes out of that building. So yeah, I feel really bad because from the time I drop him until the time I pick him up, he is inside. So if I don't actively bring him to the playground, he will not get any sunlight at all.
And he goes to school in Malaysia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, but it would be possible in terms of heat to be outside at that time.
At least there are other play schools.
Yeah.
So this is only his play school. But there are other play schools which are set up like how my primary school was, where they have an outdoor playground and they have outdoor spaces to do activities. Like there are other playgrounds. There's even one with a built-in stream and you have activities outdoors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's really nice. So it's just logistically, this was the best play school for me. And it's just sad. But at the same time, because it's sometimes a safety aspect of it as well. I think in the past 1 year or two, the heat has been really harmful. We've had cases of children actually passing away from heat stroke. So with respect to that, I'm not surprised why they choose to keep the children indoors.
Yeah, sorry, Priji, I have to go back to all this vocabulary because it's so many new words to learn. Could you explain again what these louvers are really for?
Yes, of course, Anna. Once again, we go back to my favorite window topic. I'll keep it short this time. Louvers, they are just another form of control system for windows. So they are either horizontal or vertical slats that are either fixed or you can move them up or down or sideways to block or regulate light or air. Now, if you think of the blinds that we most commonly have here in Germany, they have these slats which you can open and close. So that's basically louvers. It's the same concept. But in this case, they are attached to the windows in some form or other. But like Grashaya mentions, this glass louvers in classrooms, that definitely does not seem an ideal form of louvers in classrooms with children.
Are there any regulations in schools that you have to remain indoors, or after a certain temperature you cannot let the child go?
So like we get I didn't experience this growing up where you're told to stay in or stay out, but it then circles back again to climate change. So in the past 3 years we've gotten warnings from the metro, yeah, and they're like, it's really hot, do not come outside. I think they've closed schools once because it's too hot. They loosened the regulations where the children don't have to wear uniform and they can wear their PE wear, just casual wear because it's hot. And also I think the teachers had to make sure the children were drinking enough water. So, and also for the general public, because it's so hot. It's so hot. Yeah.
But in contrast to daylight, then are there any regulations about daylight?
No. Yeah, I think that, now that I am in the field, I realize how much light is being taken for granted. And I feel like there should be some regulations, especially I just described my work commute. If I didn't take that time to sit in my balcony or to take that 1 hour to go into the playground, I could just be living indoors throughout the year. There was no need for me to interact with the outdoors. My interaction with the outdoors is intentional. Yeah. There are people, and I think this happened during the pandemic as well, where there were a few groups, right? There were the people who were so depressed because they couldn't go outside, but there were also the people who were like, this is kind of nice just being indoors. And that was really eye-opening, I think. Yeah.
Can you describe a bit of your classrooms, if you remember it? How do school classrooms look like?
They are usually, they are two-sided window, usually for ventilation and also a lot of green outside. We moved from classroom to classroom sometimes. You don't have your specific classroom, but you will move around them. And also, I remember that on my school, there was a central patio in there. So a courtyard, and it's open air and a lot of trees and people always laying in the plazas Yeah, so you're running around the plaza or soccer playing or just running. Like,
And
I mean,
it's the plaza. It's like the outdoor space of the school.
yeah, it's the outdoor space. Yes, and it's like a big one. Like, and also in every like town, there is always a plaza in front of the church. Like that's also coming from Spain. Like, but it's really common, and a lot of people go there to play or run or.
As you described, so the classrooms are always double lit. So they have windows on both the sides. And oftentimes, would you describe it as bright classrooms spaces?
Yeah, I think most of them are bright, but I think some of them are hot. I mean, like actually the regulations in public schools, they must have north and south windows. And some of these windows might have like shadow with an overhang because it usually goes to a corridor and then the open space. So that's the common layout. But like they don't always make this orientation like the rule. So that's the problem, that you can get really hot. And sometimes these windows won't open, like ventilate. So that's a big issue because all the heat gets inside, but not in the city center. This is outside the city center. Where I work in the university, we made a research in, I think it was like 60 schools around the country. And we have like our climate or weather data loggers. And I remember this specific school in a place called Parita, where I entered the classroom, and it's on the south of the country. Yes, like southwest part of the country in Punta Arenas. And I entered to make the measurements. And there were like 3 ventilators on the ceiling and 2 ventilators from the floor. And the kids were like sweating. I mean, it was like really, really, really hot.
The school where my kids went was also an old school that was built before they had electric lighting. So the light conditions were kind of okay. And at one point, they decided to change the electrical lighting. And it was funny because one of those meetings that you have with the teacher had heard that I'm a lighting designer. So he was like, after the meeting that I had like about my kids, like the normal meeting, then he was like, "You're a lighting designer. Come and look at this. What we have. We have these horrible new lights." So they had this human-centric lighting, and all the teachers, they were actually about to send a letter to complain about the lighting, because before they entered the room and the light would automatically go on, and then when they leave the room, they would automatically go off. It was like simple, on and off. Now they would have what he called a dentist lighting. And then this dentist lighting was supposed to get warmer during the day, and he didn't understand the point why couldn't like and he found it horrible and glary and cold, and yeah, again, this cold. So Norwegian does not like cold lighting. Yeah, so this was also quite funny because when I wrote my bachelor thesis, I wrote about daylight in school buildings.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and where like daylight is of course important, and you would kind of like to have as cold light as possible to make the kids wake up. But then it's interesting to see like how is it actually received by the user. And the users obviously did not like it, or at least not the teachers.
So Helga mentions this human-centered lighting, and I just want to quickly talk about this because this is an indoor lighting concept that is actually thought to support human health, well-being, but also performance. And how does this work? It's by mimicking the natural daylight cycle, right? And it goes beyond traditional illumination because it uses dynamic, intelligent lighting to adjust the intensity, but also the color temperature. For example, cool in the morning, warm in the evening, to basically synchronize our biological clock. But in fact, it's true that it's not always liked by people. And I guess lighting is quite an emotional topic, I can tell you. So we also heard from Lenka Majerova, who told us about regulations for time spent outdoors in school in the Czech Republic.
So in Czech, we have a recommendation, or we have rule for schools and offices, which are higher than the residential, like more than twice higher for daylight only. There was a recommended direction to make windows towards a sunny side, which is not anymore, but I don't think it's actually beneficial because it overheats and then you have all the shadings and so on. So I was in school with east-oriented windows and it was a nightmare somehow. And we had, when I was at school, which is quite a long time ago, we had to go outside the classroom for the long break after a third hour or something like this. And then for lunch, if we had the afternoon time for the lunch, we had to go outside. Even when there was really bad weather, we didn't have to, but it was exceptional. Otherwise, we were pushed to go for 1 hour to go outside. It does not exist anymore, this rule.
Yeah, it's a topic dear to my heart. I've been involved for a very long time with the regulation of design of schools in France and in the UK. The UK is an interesting case study. The 1970s did a government document called Building Bulletin 55, which anyone who was involved in the design of a school had to follow. And it was right to light, ventilation. It looked at the height of children in relation to the spaces within the building, so you didn't collide with things at head level, things like that. And it provided an overall design framework. And
this is a framework to design school buildings, but that kept daylighting.
So daylight was part of it, out of ventilation, but it led to the innovations of a lot of use of clear story windows to get north light into classrooms, a lot of atria around classrooms coming off atria, so it allowed you much larger window areas into the atria to allow much more light into the adjacent classroom. So you see those kind of forms, and also creating less corridor space and more connecting space between the classrooms. So you see a shape of school buildings, and you see the same styles, particularly northern France as well. Actually, so it wouldn't be. I'm going to give you UK examples, but it's not unique to the UK. So school buildings have had at least those jurisdictions, a very strong meta framework for daylighting design, environmental design, etc., that people have worked within and produced very attractive and very functional environments, and also environments that can interact with the seasons and things and change because
But this is northern France as well?
Yeah, you see it in France. Yeah, you'd see it in France. Well, the regulation is actually French, but France is a more diverse climate type than the UK, so the manifestation in design would be different. But there would be a commonality, I think, between the school building design you see, particularly at single-story primary schools. Secondary schools primary schools tend to be flat because you've got small children, you don't want stairs, etc. So single-story primary school buildings have quite common innovative forms of being clustered, avoiding external surface area, atria in the middle, etc., etc. Very clearly defined articulation of routes, those sort of things, where the entrance is, how you get to things, etc. Because you deal with small people who, it needs to be intuitive, those kind of things. In terms of looking at good examples of daylighting design, schools in some jurisdictions would be a good place to start.
So Lenka just mentioned this rule of needing to go outside, which we also heard earlier about Norway. And unfortunately, somebody from Norway told me that this is slowly being dropped there as well. And I don't really know the reasons for this, but it seems like we are in a downward spiral where children spend less and less amount of time outside, moving their bodies, moving around, getting fresh air, and of course, getting the amount of needed light. And at least in the northern European parts, I think this seems to be a problem. But of course, this is different for already overheated countries like Malaysia, as Rishaya described it, right?
Yeah, and in the last snippet, we also hear from Brian Norton, who's a professor and researcher in solar energy applications and an expert in daylight as well. And if you hear him, he spoke about the specific design features that are integrated in schools in the UK and as well as regulations in France relating to daylight in schools. So I haven't really personally worked on projects in France yet, and so I'm not really aware of what their building regulations are. And it's something that seems interesting to explore further, like how is daylight being addressed within their building regulations. But it's probably also in French. So we need an English translation for that. And nowadays, now in Europe, we have the European standard, the EN 17037. And I think, Anna, Caro, you both are probably familiar with this standard too. And this is a standard for daylight in buildings. Now, though the standard exists, standards, unlike regulations, they are not mandatory. So when there is a specification of daylight provisions in building regulations, it is mandatory. So when we build, we have to follow these regulations. But standards are not mandatory. They are just strongly recommended technical guidelines, in this case to plan for daylight provisions. But this is really a first good step for us professionals working in Europe. It gives us a way to inform clients and have a framework to integrate daylight in building designs.
And previously, we also heard some snippets from the focus group participants, if you remember. And in fact, there seemed to have been some architects in the group, because in the snippets we're going to hear now, you will hear that some of them highlight this link between how daylight is also closely linked to overheating and climate change.
Can I just mention, it's very interesting, like looking at atrium and courtyards and how actually building forms are affected by climate and in terms of, sunlight exposure. So in the UK, most of the architects, when they design larger housing development, they usually have U-shape or L-shaped blocks, and they are orientated southwards. So they're open towards south because, there's obviously the guidance says you should have at least, south-facing living rooms. And only recently there are new building regulations which put more emphasis on overheating because of the climate change, and it is becoming a bit of a headache for architects because now they need to think more about sizes of windows and what is actually the dual aspect. The whole definition of a dual aspect flat has changed as well, so this affects as well the design of the buildings from the concept stages, and redrawing the ideas of what architecture has been used to for decades in terms of designing spaces. But actually temperature is not really a major factor. Only recently it has started being a factor in terms of south-facing windows. It was more about the amenity and exposure to sunlight, which was a positive thing. And it has slowly is becoming also a problematic issue, maybe not negative yet in a sense. So from kind of temporary external shading devices, it has moved more towards actually designing in terms of thinking about overheating as well. So it has become slowly a permanent fixture in designing as well.
In Czech architecture, things like balconies, loggias, and things like that are not traditional. They were very rarely used. If you look on the historical buildings, it's usually just windows. We did not have this region between indoor and outdoor, typically in the apartments. And now it's a huge demand for that. So architects tend and try to, it double the value of the apartment if you offer a balcony or loggia. So, of course, towards sunny side. So what happens is you have this long south-facing facades with a lot of balconies, which actually affects the daylight inside the building because they can be 1.5 meter or even broader. So you have this overhang, and then it cuts off on daylight. But this is not. You don't see the effect on it inside for calculation or something. So then you can add extra to the historical building. You can add like extra balcony, or you build it in your design. But usually architects do not think about how much daylight they're cutting off from the apartment underneath. So it on one side you profit from having outdoor space, but on the other side you cut off on the quality underneath.
I bring this up because maybe, I don't know, in Costa Rica, you guys have internal courtyards.
Yeah, definitely.
And these are, you can describe what a courtyard is, because I think it's like an atrium, but does not have the glass. It's my understanding.
Yes, a courtyard is like an open space in the middle, maybe we have in the middle like a patio, and we also have around the building. So it's an open space where you can get sun, but you don't get heat, because that's the difference. Like when you start talking about the atrium, I would start thinking about a greenhouse. That's the feeling. But there's a problem when we have this phenomena of taking the north, the global north architecture to the global south, because there are a lot of buildings that have this type of atriums, and people are can even use them because it's too hot. So, and also in buildings, they use a lot of roofs that are like acrylic roofs. And yes, because I think they don't have this much knowledge about how to design with daylight. So, and a lot of buildings get done and they don't even think about that. And then after it gets, obviously, like my work, for example, is consultancy on these issues, other than the university classes. And most of the works are to like, I don't know, arrange new designs for the buildings because they are not working and people are overheating. And in this, I would think about the climate crisis, like when I think that there must be a discussion about daylight, but also temperature. Like for me, it's really hard to think them like apart. And in this climate crisis, as I was saying, we're going to have an event in 2026 because it's like the theme is local wisdom, and it's like returning to what you had before because that was working, and the direction you're taking now, it's not working, and the climate is getting worse. And if you don't do this, that people are not going to be able to have a quality of life.
Can you explain what an atrium is? Because
an atrium is, well, an atrium is an enclosed space, if you want, in its original Roman form, okay? So literally you were in a courtyard, which is a form that then carried over into traditional Islamic architecture because it provided privacy for the family environment and that kind of stuff. So, but in its modern form, it's a glazed element, which then allows daylight to the adjacent spaces. It shouldn't be heated. It should be a tempered space, but it does then allow a greater glazed area that you would have if you're facing outside, which allows greater daylight into the adjacent spaces.
So I think atrium is a very typical UK. So it's an internal courtyard, but it has to have a glass.
Yeah, because of the climate. Yeah, and also it then becomes a usable space, periodically usable. I mean that, and it's that idea of a transitional space. Whereas obviously it might get too hot in the summer, but the school year tends to not be occupied in the summer, so that's less of an issue. But so you wouldn't use it at certain times, but you would use it as well. And also it provides circulation space. And means that your what otherwise will be corridor space becomes usable. So it's maximizing usable space as well. So there's lots of, I mean, it's a big topic. There are, like I say, whole books written on it. So it's trying to get things doing several functions. So daylight, ventilation.
Yeah, honestly, I'm just very fascinated by the barriers and chances that architecture offers. I think future Anna will become an architect, Priji. No, but what does make me sad is really that we seem to forget this older, more traditional architecture that seemed to at least has perfectly adapted to the weather and local climate, where this is slowly replaced by, I guess this is this universal architecture style. I think it's called international style. And I think it has some sort of soulless features to it because it just seems, very universal. Everything looks the same. And I guess maybe it's also problematic because it sort of ignores the local, location and cultural heritage of the places.
I totally agree, Anna. I feel like I've lived in a very agnostic way about architecture until now. And I learned a lot during this episode. I have to be very honest. I think when, we discuss the bubbles of your framework, I thought location, cool, culture, so much to talk about, behaviors, fascinating. And then it's like built environment. And I'm just like, what can you say about, what is there to talk about? And in my head, built environment just means gray. But I think I've learned a lot. And wow, I'd be up for doing an episode on Windows at some point. But anyways, going back to the snippets, when I was listening to the participants talking about atria in the middle of a school and how this, really brings daylight in a place that would otherwise just be basically a corridor, I thought, wow, that's cool because I also actually realized that my primary school had this kind of like a very small atrium. And we, as kids, we didn't really understand this. And it was we just thought it was kind of funky and a bit random to have this there. But now, it kind of makes sense with the descriptions of these architects, Priji, and also the architects that contributed to these snippets.
I'm really glad this episode inspired the little architects in you both. Now, the future me would in fact actually love to go deeper into human behaviors. It's an irony.
There you go.
It's a topic that has fascinated me since we started working on this framework and with you, Anna. I mean, it's really given me another perspective to think about. Now, before we wind up, I would like to add a little bit of a nuance to this takeaway of the universal architecture typology. When architects or building engineers have to design a building, it's often a multi-dimensional problem solving. So thinking of location and climate is just one small, tiny aspect. There are other aspects that heavily influence decision. Is it easy to construct? Is the materials widely available? What does the market want? What does the client want? And so while we have more of these glass facade buildings, which by the way, give us plenty of opportunities to bring daylight indoors, and they connect us to the outdoors. They frame such fantastic views high above in cities. There are many of these buildings that are being designed thoughtfully. They are optimized even for heat and daylight, offering plenty of control systems for users to obtain their desired kind of daylight. And you know what? I just realized that's actually an advertisement for the type of job that I do as a sustainability consultant. But agreed, this is a very small niche in the big wide world of building construction sector.
Okay, guys, so it's time to wrap up. And not just this episode, but actually our whole entire mini-series, because this is our last episode, as we said at the beginning. And I have to say I'm a little bit sad because I think the next time I will record a Light O'Clock episode, I'll miss having you as co-hosts. But I will try to do this short and smooth, so feel free to jump in if I miss anything. So what we've been talking about across these episodes is this framework that you developed to understand how we interact with daylight. And that includes 4 key factors: location, culture, behavior, and the built environment, visualized as these interconnected bubbles. And I think that's really one of the main takeaways, that these factors don't exist in isolation, but they're constantly influencing each other. In the first episode, we focused on location, things like latitude and how that shapes daylight patterns and seasons, or the lack of them, temperature and how that affects our associations with sunlight and daylight, and also the geographical characteristics of a place, whether it's mountainous, green, or more urban, and how that influences how much daylight we actually experience. In the second episode, we moved on to culture and behavior, so things like cultural traditions around light, social norms, and even gender roles during childhood, and how all of that shape how people interact with daylight in their daily lives. And then in this final episode, we talked about the built environment, how architecture and design consider daylight in different places, how that shows up in things like school or workplaces, and also how there seems to be a trend towards more standardized design globally, sometimes at the expense of local needs and cultural context.
Yeah, thank you, Caro, for this very nice summary. And wow, I can't believe we're at the end of this little mini series, guys. Really sad, as you said. I mean, as you just summarized, Caro, we've talked about so many things, and just going back while we try to dissect these different aspects like location, culture, built environment, and individual behavior, of course, they are inevitably connected and cannot be separated. And I mean, this is why we have these bubbles and why these bubbles are inside each other. And the biggest bubble is the location, because this you can't really change at all. It will always influence everything else. But of course, it's also a chicken egg problem where you don't know what was there first, right? So it's just going both directions. But I think I want to end with the climate change. So that with increasing heat or even more extreme weather events, and at the same time, more and more people spending most of their time inside, I think the role of the built environment, but also individual behavior, will become more and more relevant in still achieving what we want, right? The goal of the dark nights in the bright days. And at the same time, that geolocation and culture do give a lot of rules and limit certain aspects. So I think just with individualized medicine, I guess individual solutions will become more relevant in the future, but we need a strong voice for the right recommendations and make them fit for the culture at hand.
That's very well described, Anna, about the bubbles and the framework. And I had so much fun recording this podcast with you both, Anna and Caro. And from creating this framework to recording this podcast, Anna, you and I, we have become parents. So we have come a long way. We have transitioned into different lifestyles. And I say this because my son now turns 1 soon and starts what's called the Kita. And this is a kindergarten in Germany, and it's a new cultural system for me. And we are now making sure he would get enough daylight exposure when he goes to Kita for 5, 6, 7 hours in a day. Coming back to the framework and the bubbles, when we first started plotting these bubbles, these terms seemed very simple: location, culture, behavior, built environment. And the more we started dissecting it, it really seemed so much, or to provide so much more facet and understanding into how each of these really influence each other. And so when Anna, as a psychologist or as a behavioral scientist, looks into daylight exposure, it becomes more and more clear that she has to look into the other aspects. And for me, as a person who is looking at daylight and bringing daylight into spaces, it becomes more and more clear that I also have to have a thinking hat about behaviors. And so this is really a great process of learning for me. I've learned a lot in this journey, and I will miss you too.
Yeah, thanks, Priji. And just to maybe end with saying thank you to the Daylight Academy, because this is exactly what they also funded us for, to have this, dialogue between different disciplines and to dive into different areas that we would normally not think about. So I think this is exactly what we wanted to achieve with this. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. And yeah, I think it turned out to be a great success.
Yeah, and if I can just add, Anna, being part of the Daylight Academy, one of the perks is this is where I met you. We get to interact with very different disciplines. And a shout out to Neil Kelso, who was a colleague at Daylight Academy. And we spoke with him quite a lot. He has an expertise in anthropology and linguistics. And we spoke with him quite a lot to actually form these very open-ended questions that we asked during the summer school. And they were specifically designed to get such narrative responses, and it gave us the opportunity to talk a lot about it and to discuss this as well.
Super. So it's a praise to interdisciplinarity. That's a tough word. And with that, and with these beautiful smiles that we have on our faces, I'm going to end the recording. It was a pleasure, guys, and catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Light O'Clock. This podcast is produced by me, Caro. The podcast team includes many of my amazingly supportive colleagues and lab members. Manuel Spitzchen does the scientific fact-checking, and music, mix, and sound design are done by Ingo Bednarek. Show notes and additional resources are created by Maidel Fernandez Alonso and myself. Our social media team includes Lucien Bickerstaff, Nilufar Tabande, and Zara Alkaf. And Anna Magdalena Billa is our test listener. Light O'Clock is a podcast produced by the Translational Sensory and Circadian Neuroscience Unit, and we are supported by the Circadian Mental Health Network, the Viscom Prize from the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Psychologie and the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Psychophysiologie und ihre Anwendung, the Max Planck Society and the Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics, and the Technical University of Munich.